Welcome to stage 2, everybody. Today we're going to be covering. Sorry. It looks like we have one of our lives didn't go through, but the other 3 did. Sorry about that. Welcome to stage 2 for our ISO 1345 refresher training. Today is going to be a long session. If you can't stay the entire time, and I guarantee it will go over an hour, if you can't stay the entire time, don't dismay, because even though it's live, we're going to have it remain up there as a posting, and the logical place to drop off would be right after we cover design controls and just before we get into purchasing processes. That's approximately halfway, maybe just a little over halfway through the slide deck. So if you need to drop off there, I understand. And go back and watch the second half, and you can watch it as many times as you want. And in the below, there's going to be in the description, there'll be a link where you can register for the course. And it's a free course, so all you're really registering for is a link to give you, here's where the recordings are, so you can watch them anytime you want. And here's the links so you can fill in the quiz for stage 1 and stage 2 and get your score. A couple of people have asked, where's my certificate? So when you finish at the very end, it gives you the results of your quiz. So you can print that out. You also get an email confirmation. You can print that out. That is your certificate. If you need other training records, we can provide it, but we can't provide it to everybody. So if you're one of our consulting clients, we can help you out, but we can't help the 1,000 people that watch us for free. So I apologize that for the misunderstanding of what we meant by a training certificate. A training record is what you will be getting. So you get an email telling you that you passed, and you will get the results on the screen when you finish. If you have any other questions, please contact us at medicaldeviceacademy.com on our Contact Us page. Okay, here we go, jumping into the presentation. Whoop, I just deleted my shared screen. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. So the first thing that we thought we'd open up with today is a poll. There are going to be 2 YouTube polls that you can take. So you go to our YouTube channel. We have a link down below. It should be in the YouTube live link. So go to our Medical Device Academy channel, and you can take the quiz. The question is, what would you like us to include in our lead auditor course? Anybody that's going to be taking a lead auditor course for medical devices, they need to be trained as an absolute minimum 1345 is part of the training. So that's why we've linked it to this. But if you're interested in that lead auditor training, we're going to be launching that in December, and we'd love some feedback from people on what you're looking for in a course. And we have a couple of suggestions in the poll. If you don't like those, just click on the last link and comment on it in the links, and we'll be able to see what other things you're suggesting. Okay. One of the things that I covered in stage 1, but I'm going to touch on in more detail here, is procedures. That's control of documents. And you might have wondered, well, like, how many procedures are we required to have? Well, here is my official list. But I put a little asterisk at the end of that. It's the official list for what's required in the 1345, but there are some other standards that are referenced by 1345 that also have procedure requirements. You are also required to comply with national regulations. So if you are in the US and you're selling products here, you're going to have to comply with 21 CFR 803 for medical device reporting. You're going to have to comply with recalls. So 806. You're going to have to comply with clinical trial requirements, which is an 812 for investigational device exemptions. All those additional requirements that you're going to have, those are going to add to your procedure list. If you do things in Canada, you're going to need Canadian procedures for incident reporting and medical device licensing in Canada. All those add to the list. So this is the minimum. People are like, this is a crazy amount of procedures. It says in the standard, the organization shall establish documented procedures, or a documented procedure, or a procedure. So they use different wordings in different places, so sometimes it's easy to miss where it's saying you shall have it. And I've tried to highlight that throughout this slide decks. This is what we covered last time. We covered 8 processes that required procedures. It was a stage 1 readiness audit. The auditor, if they're doing a stage 1 audit, should be verifying you have all your procedures. But some of those, all they're doing is asking for a list, looking in your manual, making sure you actually have the procedure. They don't have time to read them all. They don't have time to review every single one of these 34 procedures that are required. So they're just going to look very closely at the ones I've highlighted in yellow during stage 1, and they're going to verify that you have the other ones from a list of documents or your quality manual or both. So that's how they work. And then when they show up for the stage 2 audit, things get interesting. They start digging in and asking for a lot more procedures at a lot faster pace. And there might be 2 auditors instead of 1. So you've got a lot faster to go. So I came up with a new image for documents. When a documented procedure is required, I will use this icon instead. You can see I modernized it a little bit, showing it on a tablet instead of showing it on a piece of paper, because nobody uses paper anymore. Nobody even has a printer anymore. Nobody wants to pay the money for toner. So if you have it on your screen, that's what it might look like. And there are 26 of them in the stage 2 that they focus on, in addition to the 8 from the stage 1. Okay. How do you know that it is a controlled document? This is an important question. And I bring it up from stage 2 in the stage 2 part, because even though we cover document control in stage 1, what's going to happen is the inspector or auditor is going to say, these are the things you have to change. These are some mistakes that I see. And they're going to give you some findings in stage 1. So you're going to have some changes you have to make for stage 2 that include procedure revisions. And they're going to want to know that this is a controlled procedure, that you reviewed and approved the procedure. So what they're looking for to say this is a controlled document and it's been reviewed and approved is you have a document number. In this case, our document number, and see if I can get a little highlighter here to help you out. This is what we're talking about. That's your document number. Next, the version. Now we have zeros in front of ours to show their drafts. When we change from 0 point something to 1.0, that means it's the initial release. We also use the numbers after the decimal to indicate whether it requires retraining or not. So if there is a change after the decimal place, no retraining required. If it's a change before the decimal place, so going from a 1 to a 2, that's a significant change and retraining is required. So it communicates additional information, significant revisions versus minor revisions. The third thing they want is effective date. So most of the times, company uses the date that they approved it, but it could be a date in the future, allowing people time to complete their training. Either way is okay, and I explain that when you buy our quality system. I explain effective dates and how to use that and different options and what the consequences are. But that, and I've got this one hair that's driving me crazy. Sorry, folks. So you have to put down a date that it's effective. And ideally, they've completed the training and you revised the procedure, and it's a date prior to the stage 2 audit. The fourth thing that they're looking for is a revision history. That's down here. And the reason why they want the revision history, all auditors jump right to the revision history, whether it's in the front or the back of your procedure or somewhere in the middle. They want to know what you changed since last time. So if they were there last time and you had version 1.0 and now you have version 1.1 or 2.0, they're just going to look at what you changed. If you made multiple changes, they may look at more than that, but in the short amount of time, probably 6 weeks between stage 1 and stage 2, you probably only made the revisions they told you to make, and therefore they're just looking at They want to see evidence in your revision history that you made those changes. So they're going to look at what changed. They're going to probably jump to that section, and they're going to probably look at, so this is saying why it changed, and then what changed. They want that too. And this over here is the document change notice number. It could be in your system a document change order or DCO instead of a DCN. And they're going to look at the date, make sure the date's accurate, and they're going to look for the revision is correct. And they're going to compare it to last time, and they're going to look for who made that revision and were they qualified. So that's the kind of things they're looking for. They might even ask as a sampling, they may ask for the DCN or DCO number that you give them in there. They may actually ask for a copy of that record to see all the details behind it for approval of that change. Okay. That leads us right into training. We covered some of the clauses in 6 last time, or one of the clauses in 6 last time. I believe it was resources. Now we're covering human resources. So you have provision of resources. This is human resources. When you're thinking about this, think of it as also the training requirement. And you can see in here they mention training multiple times. But the key thing here is to understand the difference between a record of training, a training requirement, because you have to document somewhere what the training requirements are. You also have to show effectiveness of that training. So you might say, oh, the person was able to pass a quiz. You have to show competency, which is much tougher. Oftentimes the person actually has to perform the task, and you have to have an expert watch them or edit the results, review the results, audit the results. And then last but not least, there is a requirement to make sure that employees are aware of the consequences of defects in their work. So if you do something wrong, what will happen? They should be at least aware of that. So those are the things that we're looking for in training. And you also need to identify retraining requirements, which is why we use the version number of the procedure to tell people when retraining is required. Okay. Documented procedure. This is one of those documented procedures. So whenever you have this logo up here, there's going to be somewhere in here where we say documented procedure. In this case, it says document the process instead of document the procedure. But the expectation is you will have a procedure for training. And this might be the only place where they use this specific wording, and they use different wording in other places. There are several different variations, but this is a requirement. They expect you to have a training procedure. Next, infrastructure. This would be your facilities, the building that you are in. So it even listed in here, buildings, workspace, associated utilities. You want to think about process equipment that you're going to need. What software do you need? So we highlighted software here. Maintenance activities. What is the frequency of maintenance? You need records of that maintenance. There should be preventive maintenance. Anytime you do a significant repair or replacement, you should be identifying that as well. You might also have a list of the equipment. You might have equipment ID numbers. You might identify which equipment requires validation, which equipment requires calibration. Ideally, you've got a computer system that manages it all. It might be the same system that's managing calibrated gauges. It might be a separate system. But because that equipment affects the quality of your product, because it has to work right to make the product, that would be something that has to be under control and you have to have records of. It affects the quality of your product. So this is an important clause. A lot of auditors forget to look at maintenance records. They forget to look at calibration records. They forget to look at validation records. All three of those, if you learn the turtle diagram that I talked about last time, that would be step 4. That would be step 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. What are you doing the work with? What equipment, what facilities, what calibrated gauges? Is it, does it require maintenance? Does it require validation? Okay, work environment is next. So once again, we have the procedure symbol, and it says you need procedures to monitor and control the work environment. There is additional requirements to document requirements for health, cleanliness, and clothing. For example, if you have the flu, don't come to work and make sterile products, please. Okay, stay home, keep all your other co-employees healthy, and don't make your medical devices dangerous to use because you sneezed on them. Next, cleanliness. If you're making a sterile product, you have a certain amount of bioburden that you have measured, and you want it to be that level or lower. So keeping clean is important. So if you're going to be working in a clean room, yes, you have a gown over the top of you, but you should be clean underneath because not everything stays inside the gown. Unfortunately, we do shed skin. So you get little bits of skin on your clothing. You can't always see it when it's white, which is sometimes why it's nice to not use white gowns, even though that's what they use all the time. And then the clothing of the personnel, you may define if they are in controlled environments, what kind of clothing they're supposed to wear underneath. Believe it or not, one of the best things to wear underneath is cycling shorts. So for those of you that are like most Vermonters and love to go cycling, that's actually excellent clothing from a shedding of skin and dust and particles. It really reduces it. And it might be a little bit cooler than some of your heavy winter wear. And usually nobody's ever complaining about being cold in the clean room when they're wearing their controlled environment clothing. If you have somebody taking a tour through the facility, such as your auditor for the stage 2 audit, they are going to test you. Not all of them, but 99% of them will test you. They will do something wrong and see if you correct them, or they will wait for you to do what you're supposed to do, which is train them on how to gown. So one of the common things we're teaching is top-down approach to gowning and where things go when you take them off and which size to wear, in which order put things on, and how to make sure it's fit properly, and to look in the mirror to see that it's fitting properly. Those are some of the things. There's usually a sign that gives gowning instructions, and the person would walk that person through it. And if you're going to hang a gowning sign in your clean room, please make sure that's a controlled document, and maybe even references like this is Appendix B from our procedure. And it says in there to be printed and posted in the controlled environment here in the map. That'd be really helpful. There are additional requirements here for the work environment. You can also look at the 2 standards for the work environment that are referenced as a note in 1345. That is a little bit misleading because 14698 is actually 2 standards. It's a -1 and a -2. So you need both of those. And 14644, joy of joys, I believe that's up to 14 procedures now, but maybe one of them is still in draft. So, or standards. So that's a lot of dashes there. -1, -2, -3. You may not need all of them, but if you're the person for a large facility that has a clean room, you might need all of them for your job. Not everybody else needs it. So a lot of work to do and learn about how to clean the clean room, how to maintain the clean room, how to do maintenance, change out HEPA filters, how to monitor surface viables, airborne viables, and any particulates in the room, how to rotate cleaning agents and disinfecting agents, how to train people, how to gown, how to not gown, how to do sampling in the different zones, how to do trend analysis of the particulates, all that stuff, part of those standards. So you definitely have a lot to learn if you're going to have a controlled environment. This is a picture on the right here of a fairly modern modular clean room. These controlled environments are relatively quick to put up. I've seen people put them up in hours at a trade show just to show off how easy it is. So if you get there early and say, wait, when are you going to assemble that? They're often assembling them right at the clean room, or assembling the clean room right at the show. So trade shows are sometimes a great place to see some of that stuff. We're seeing trade shows kind of die out, so you may have trouble finding one that's still being done that way, but maybe they'll have a video for you. And they're not that hard to do. I've seen a lot of people put them up themselves. I've actually put up a couple of myself and designed a few of them. They're not that hard, but they have new modern features, these big acrylic walls that you can see through that are easy to clean. And that really makes it easy to see the dirt. And it also is nice for visitors that don't want to gown up and go in. Maybe the auditor will be lucky for you, and they don't want to gown up and get all hot and sweaty. So they stay outside and look on through the glass like they're not supposed to. They're supposed to go in the room and sample. But, I always try to go in there and look at things so I can do a thorough audit. But you may get lucky and you may have an auditor that never even goes in there. What is product realization? So there are a few places where they say you shall do this throughout all product realization processes, such as maybe identification of status. Throughout all of product realization, you shall identify the status of the device with regard to inspection requirements or monitoring and measuring requirements. Well, product realization, you have to look at the titles of the different sections. Clause 7 is product realization. 7.1, product realization planning. So that gives you an idea. The first clause of most major clauses is a planning clause, because we have the general process approach of plan, do, check, act. So product realization is clause 7. And the first part there, we give a description of what the processes are that would be involved in product realization planning. This gives you an idea of what things should be in the scope of your certification. For ISO 1345, it should be design and development, manufacturing, installation, service, and distribution. And if you don't install, that gets deleted. If you don't service, because it's disposable, you delete that. So things you don't do or aren't applicable to that type of product, you delete. But normally that's a fairly common wording. Software is a little bit different for product realization, and that's why we really need a better standard out there just for software as a medical device. Because software, you don't have manufacturing. You don't have installation in the traditional sense. You don't have service in any sense. You have updates and patches, and you have delivery, which is virtual, usually through a VPN or some other secure way. Sometimes people deliver software by flash drives and CD-ROMs and things like that. But that is really very rare at this point. 10 years ago, maybe, but today, hardly ever. Almost always being downloaded from the internet or sent by some VPN tunnel or a file transfer protocol or something virtual. For planning of product realization, this is clause 7.1. One of the things, and I didn't highlight here, I probably should have, the very bottom of this has a note. More information can be found in 14.971. Part of your planning should be risk-based. You need to know what hazards are involved, what risks are possible, what risk controls need to be put in place. That's part of product realization planning. Another part of it is, do you have the capacity? Do you have the raw materials? Do you have the resources in terms of people and equipment and space and capacity for when you get an order? Do you have regulatory approval to ship to that location? So if you're launching a new product, you need to figure all that stuff out way ahead of time, not on the fly as you're trying to fill an order. So you're required to have a procedure for risk management, and even says that in 1345. Document one or more processes for risk management. And somebody's like, what? One or more? Why would you have more than one? Well, maybe you have a slightly different process for process risk analysis, design risk analysis, software risk analysis, software hazards, cybersecurity risk assessments, usability, use-related risks. All of those have slight differences, and you handle them differently. You document them differently. They have different deliverables and different standards. So having one procedure that does all is probably not practical or even a good idea. So you might want different risk management documents and different risk management procedures for design, software, cybersecurity, usability, and manufacturing processes at a minimum. So if you're in that software in a medical device category, you probably have all of those. You have to have records of risk management, and you have to plan it, and you have to determine all those things, A, B, C, D, that are listed there. Here is a little bit more detail about risk management right from clause 4.1 of 14971. So it says, you shall document and maintain the process, and it lists the 4 things. So that's right from the 14971 standard. So that's another place you need it. Can you get it out of it for other countries? No, you can't get out of it for other countries, because places like Europe, they say state of the art is 14971. Health Canada recognizes 14971. If you have an electrical device, you have to have a risk management file according to 14971. So you're not going to be able to get out of it. Don't try. And I made this a gold-colored procedure because this is a procedure requirement from something outside of 1345. So I used a different color. There is also a guidance document that you may not be aware of. It's an IEC Technical Report 80002-1 for software and firmware. It's, I'm going to probably butcher the name, but it's how to apply 14971 to software is essentially what the title is. I can't remember it off the top of my head right now, but this is from Annex A. It's a small table, but it's the first table in there that has shows you the relationship between hazards, foreseeable sequence of events that could relate to harm, initiating cause of the harm, the hazardous situation that it creates, and then the actual harm, so some sort of injury or death. So they give you examples. Everybody says, well, software can't hurt me, it's software. Well, it creates a hazardous situation that can lead to a sequence of events that can lead to harm. So this is an example. This is not all the possible scenarios. This is just 3 that they have as an example. So it shows you that sequence, and they want you to document that. In addition, Annex B has a much longer table that's 6 pages long that lists tons and tons of different types of hazards. So when you come to me and you have identified 11 hazards for your software, and your software is more complicated than their example, you're not done. You've only started. You have a lot more work to do. So this is exactly what Class 3 companies do. They go to them and they make sure they've covered every single one. So start with that as your benchmark. Get all the things that are applicable in that 6-page table. Make sure you have at least those as a starting point. The requirements related to product. So you have to document this. And there's these minimum requirements here. So you would list each of those. This would be defined by your customer. It may be defined by regulations. It may be both. But you have to review whether you meet those requirements. And the starting point is determining what the requirements are. Maybe it's all listed for you in your purchase order. Maybe it's not. Maybe they didn't issue a purchase order. Maybe they're buying it from you online. So you have to determine what the requirements are for the product from these multiple sources and plan for that and make sure that you have them before you go shipping product. This is the review process. So review of the requirements related to product, that's covered in 722. So you would receive it. Even when you're first creating a contract with somebody, that would be the 721. You're acquiring them as a customer, you're determining the pricing, determining the packaging, determining how they need to have it delivered. A lot of software companies go through this step. Then when they actually are reviewing the purchase order, they make sure that they can meet the timeline that they want it, the quantity that they want, and the specific way they're asking it for it to be delivered. Especially important for software where you're transmitting it electronically, and it might have to be configured a specific way, may have to have security keys. It's extremely important for anything that requires installation, extremely important for anything that requires service, or you have an ongoing contract with the customer. There's also a requirement for communication. So it's There's communication outside the company to customers, and then there's a communication to employees. In the earlier section where we were talking about management responsibility, they need to communicate quality policy and quality objectives to people in the company. You also have things you have to report and communicate to your customers. So product information, there's a standard for that. I didn't write it down here, but it's ISO 20417, information provided by the manufacturer. It tells you step by step how to build your direction for use or user manual. It also tells you about labeling requirements. That is the best practice. Then there's a symbol standards out there. You would have contracts with your customer. You would have maybe a supply agreement with them, maybe pricing agreements, maybe a response time to do maintenance or fixes if they have a problem, or downtime. Any feedback that you get from them, complaints, how that would be handled. You want to communicate to them, this is how you contact us to file a complaint. Please use this number. Please use this email. Please give us this information. Like, make sure you give us the UDI number, because that's what we need in order to figure out which product you're complaining about. And also what lot it is, so we can make sure there's not a problem with other product in that same lot. And then last but not least, advisory notices or recalls. That's something you have to communicate. You're either going to have an advisory notice that goes out for something that doesn't have any potential for harm, or something that does have the potential for harm. You're going to do an urgent recall and you're going to send it out. Whether it's reportable, it's in the details of the regulations for recalls, but you still need those two forms ready to go at a moment's notice. You don't want to have any delay if you're going to communicate something where somebody could get hurt. Okay, design and development. There was just an article published. It was something that I've been working on for a while. And somebody had asked me if they could interview, and I did the interview. I was explaining to them this diagram, the waterfall diagram. A lot of people don't realize that the traditional project management approach that this is based on, that's 1910 technology. During World War I, they came up with traditional project management approach to make sure they got supplies to the front lines during the war. That's not something that was developed for software development of medical devices. We need something new for today's modern era. Now, the V diagram is in the 62304 standard, and I'm going to show you a picture of that. But that also isn't ideal. It's a model. The problem is we need something that also fits not only the way we develop products, but also how we regulate them. So we require that, hey, maybe you should stop making changes in the engineering department because I need to pay for all this testing and I don't want to have to pay for it twice. So you need to freeze your design. Second of all, I want to make sure that we get regulatory approval, so we can't change it during the middle of the review by the FDA or CE marking or Canada or whoever's reviewing it. We need to freeze the design and give them, this is the design we're submitting. We're not going to change it in the middle of your review. So a hybrid project management system is really what we need for medical devices. Something that's a hybrid of the phase gate approach and the iterative V diagram. That's what we really actually are using. We just don't have a good name for that model other than hybrid. And of course, there's no training on how to use a hybrid approach. So this is the standard. This is the diagram the FDA uses with permission from Health Canada, because they didn't even create it. And Health Canada copied it from 1994's version of ISO 9001. You're required to have a procedure, but you are not required to copy this diagram, and I applaud you if you don't. Come up with your own hybrid model that uses an iterative approach and has two key gates, one before you start spending all that money on testing and one when you send it off to be reviewed. Here's the V diagram that I talked about. You can find that in 62304. It's an IEC standard. The latest version is 2015. There are some older versions with amendments depending on what standards body you're purchasing it from, but this is their diagram. One way somebody described it to me is it's a lot like a waterfall diagram that's been tipped 45 degrees. So if that helps you think about it a little bit, but the concept is that every single time you fail one of these tests on the side, so unit testing, integration testing, system testing, or simulated use. Anytime you fail one of those, you have to go back to the other side and make changes. Maybe changes in documentation, maybe changes in your code, but there's a lot of work that may have to be iterative. The good news is software is usually easy to retest and inexpensive and fast. Hardware, not so much. So you might have a different model for software in a medical device than you have for software as a medical device, just because of the logistics of, I really don't want to revise my whole entire risk management file because we changed this one little thing in the firmware, for example. The next clause in 1345 or sub clause is design and development planning. You have to plan your efforts. So a lot of people say to me, no, I ask this question all the time. Do you have a design plan? Have you started your DHF? And the answer is no, but I'm ready to submit a 510K. Like, wrong. That's absolutely wrong. The 510K is at the end of the process. When you're done the development and you've done all your verification testing, you've done all your validation testing, and you're in the middle of design transfer to production. That's when you do a 510K. So the plan came at the very beginning. And they're like, well, we didn't want to do a plan because we're going to change stuff. It says update it as the project progresses. It says that. Read it right here. So update. It should be updated. It says it right here. I'm not making this up. It's in black and white on my screen now, yellow, black and white. So update as the project progresses. You have to maintain it and update it. So come up with an initial draft of your plan and update it as you make changes, please. And I even have a video where I demonstrated I can create one in 30 minutes. So it's not that hard, and it will really help you. It will help. Next, design and development inputs. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding about inputs created by that horrible waterfall diagram. So forget the waterfall diagram ever happened and read these very carefully. This includes inputs, it says, should be able to verify or validate. So most of the time, you're not doing both. It's possible you could do both, but most of the time, you're not doing both. So these people that have the preconception that for every single design input, I have to have a user need that I'm going to validate, that's wrong. You were misled by the very bad, evil waterfall diagram. It misled you. You fell for that trap. Do not create a user need for every input. User needs are inputs. That's why we don't have a clause for user needs. User needs are something you get from your usability engineering file that didn't exist when they wrote this. So when they created this in 1996, and they made no revisions to it except to add statistical techniques, what they were saying here is, yeah, you're going to have to validate some things, you're going to verify others, and you will have to know which one you do. Well, now we've come a little bit further, and we know that simulated use, we validate. That's a validation test. And things like sterilization are verification, even though it has the term validation because it's process validation. So we always get confused between process validation and design validation. We're validating actual use or simulated use. That's it. And we're verifying just about everything else. So that's very important. And just in case you thought I made this stuff up, yes, in the ISO 13485 standard, they mention 62366. So this is not a new requirement. This has been around since they published 1345 2016. And that standard's been around even longer than that. It's been through some revisions, but it's been around even longer than that. So you have to determine what your inputs are to your design, and you have to verify most of them. And there are a few that are going to be user needs that you will validate. How do you create these user needs or user needs and inputs? Here's your list. Post-market surveillance is an input into your design process, gives you ideas for what the customer wants or doesn't like about the existing product. Your stakeholders, maybe Kaiser family of hospitals needs something specific for their network, so they need you to design your software a certain way. That would be an example. You have an entire document called Essential Principles for Safety and Performance that I showed when I talked about the medical device file last time. I'm going to talk about it again. That gives you all kinds of inputs for all kinds of different technological characteristics like sterility, biocompatibility, electrical safety, EMC. It's all in there. And that Essential Principles for Safety and Performance is international. They also have something very similar called the GSPRs in Annex 1 of the European regs. And then you have all your technological characteristics that you want, your applicable standards, your applicable guidance. There's nothing in here that you're going to be putting in like size AA batteries. That's not an input. Inputs are requirements. What is your test requirement that you're going to measure? So SRS, software requirement spec that you test in software, that's a design input. Usability engineering. So we covered the 62366. We saw it was a note. You should actually be creating a usability engineering file. Usability covers transport, storage, installation, operation, maintenance and repair, and disposal. Things that we forget about. Sometimes you have to throw things out. Sometimes you have to clean them. Sometimes you have to ship them. Those are important tasks that you don't want to damage the device or hurt somebody with. Maybe it's too heavy. Maybe you need a cart for it. Those are important things. So once again, a procedure that has requirements that's not in 1345, it's just a note. And in clause 4.1.1, it says you have to have a procedure for usability engineering. So that was another procedure you don't have that's above and beyond the 34 that I identified. So yes, you need a usability engineering procedure. You need a risk management procedure. They weren't on the list, but you need them. User needs. This is the best example I've come up with out there for explaining what the difference is between user needs and inputs. Both of these wheelchairs are going to pass ANSI readiness standards, or they're going to pass tests that are ISO standards for wheelchairs. If the upper wheelchair was a manual wheelchair for going down the terminal at the airport, it would have the same ISO standard and the same anti-resonant requirements that the lower one does, but they would not be the same wheelchair. If you try to take that wheelchair that you see at the airport and you try to play basketball with it, it's not going to survive and you're going to get hurt. That chair on the bottom is lightweight and it has countered wheels to help you with stability. So you won't tip over and get hurt, and it makes it easier to maneuver. And it has special features to it. It has a very low backrest for a reason, because you're reaching around, you're very agile, and you got to go throw the ball and reach back and shoot. You don't do that in the wheelchair at the airport. Those aren't the things you do use it for. You see people sitting in those wheelchairs and they're just sitting for long periods of time and not moving. That's why they're comfortable. This is not built for comfort. This is built for playing basketball. And the one above is for somebody that they can barely move and they're using a joystick to get themselves around. So they have very high mobility needs. So those two people are very different needs groups. So you have very different user needs in the design of your device, but they might have the same inputs. So very different, and that's why they're different. One, you're going to test it with usability testing. See if they can use it. See if this new joystick that we designed, you can still manipulate it, or no, it's too difficult. We need some other joystick that's easier to manipulate. Whereas the other guy's like, it doesn't go fast enough. So different user needs, not different inputs, different user needs. We have security requirements. So this was not in ISO 1345 because 1345 is outdated. It's prior to the Patch Act. We need something in there for security. So we'll see another 1345 edition, and they'll probably just sprinkle in the word software a little bit more. Maybe they'll use the novel word firmware, and they'll put in the word security and reference to the standard. Note, if you want more information, go see the standard. Oh, we're done. That's all we're doing. We're not doing anything more. But there is a requirement in the regulations. If you want to submit a device 510K and you have any kind of connectivity to the internet, you need to have these 8 things. And they're not playing. They say they're please tell us what page it can be found on. They're talking about what page of your SRS will they find this control? Where will they find it in your SDS? What page? What document? That's what they want. So for all of those controls. And if you don't have one of them, you got to come up with a really good reason why you don't need that or it's not applicable to your device. So you could become certified to ISO 27001, which is an information security standard, and the hospitals that you sell to probably would like that. But the FDA is saying those controls, those are inputs we're giving you. We want to see them in the outputs of your design. Then we have outputs. So I'm going to cover more on outputs very quickly here, but outputs are your drawings and your specifications primarily. You also want to include purchasing information, maybe service information, but this is the final design that tells somebody how to make your product. Not the test requirements. Test requirements were inputs. This is the final design that we're going to test. And some of those tests are going to be on just components or systems, like the electrical system. At this point, once we've decided what our outputs are, we are ready to freeze the design. We freeze the design because we don't want to spend a bunch of money twice. The most expensive part is not doing the design meetings up to this point and all the design thinking. Even the prototypes aren't all that expensive. The samples that you need for doing the testing, that gets expensive, and the testing labs are expensive. And if you have to do a clinical study, even more expensive. And you will be shocked at the price of usability studies. It is not uncommon to see quotes for $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 for a usability study. We've done a few that have been under 100, but they're hard to do for that little. Usually you're looking at something over $100,000 for a usability study. So that's expensive. You got to freeze that design. So we're not going to willy-nilly change things in the user manual after we've started a usability study. We were supposed to do that informative testing before we got to the verification validation. That should have been something during the development process prior to the design freeze, not after the design freeze. And you would often communicate this change to people. We're going to make a change in drawings and specifications. A revision number normally changes. So you might have 0 point something prior to the freeze. At the freeze, it becomes 1.0. If you use alphanumeric changes, you go from a 1 to an A or an A to a 1. I've seen both. Also, there's a video that's a real live stream video that's still posted if you want to go see more information about that. Okay, design reviews. Because of the waterfall diagram, everybody thinks we have to do these reviews every single time we hit a phase. You get to the end of phase, you have to do a review. You get to the end of phase, have to do a review. Have to have a different form to document the design review because it's a different phase and they're different deliverables, and we need this big long checklist. Yes, somebody that you know plagiarized what GE Healthcare had and shared it to all their friends, and that's why you're looking at that checklist. I know because that's how I was trained by an ex-GE person. So it's a real story. But that's not the only way to do it. It's not required. And I even brought up, like, we're not actually required to do one at every single one of these phases. He says, yes, but that's how I'm going to manage it. My boss said, we're going to have a phase gate and we're going to have all deliverables done by that, or we will not go forward to the next phase. Projects that he was developing different at the same time, and he wanted to make sure all our ducks were in a row before we went to the next phase. He didn't want to get surprised by something that was half done. In the bigger companies like GE Healthcare, where he came from, you don't even get the money to go to the next phase if you haven't passed all the requirements for all the deliverables. And they decide how to manage their money by deciding, oh, this one has passed that gate, we'll give it more money. This one has not passed that gate, we're going to not give it more money. So that's something that happens in the bigger companies. But technically, you're only required to do one design review at the very, very end. So you decide for your project how many reviews you want and why. If I were going to do more than one, I would probably do one at the design freeze and do one at final release, because I'd be using a hybrid process. And after I'm done all my iterations, that's when I would do the design freeze review. And that's when the big money starts getting spent, not the little money. And then I'd have one more that says, are we ready to launch the product? If you wanted to insert one more, it might be, are we ready to submit to the regulator? Because that you don't want to screw up either. But that would be a very short review. And I typically do that for clients within a couple hours. So it's not a big activity, and is a lot smaller group for that particular review. And I'm not sure I would call that a design review. Okay. Design and development verification. One of the things that was added here in 2016 is statistical techniques with a rationale for sample size. That was also added to the design validation. That wasn't in there before, but everybody kept on making that mistake of not providing a statistical rationale. The Europeans want, the Canadians want, everybody wants statistics to be driving your decision, not a magic number of 3. Sometimes we get away with 3 lots, but we don't normally get away with 3 samples total. It's normally 3 lots of 10 for a total of 30 when we have variable data, and 3 lots of 20 each for a total of 60 when we have attribute data. And those are just rules of thumb. You could do power calculations and determine what is the correct sample size. You could also be looking at reliability and repeatability for the process and say, okay, this is how much I need. What is my confidence level? I need a 90% confidence level. I need a 95%. So a quality engineer and some statistics will probably be required before you jump into this. And you want to have that person working on the protocols for your pre-sub, which is way, way back at the beginning of the development phase, after inputs have been approved, but before you finalize your design. That's when you're writing those protocols. So regardless of what the final design looks like, it's still got to go through the same protocol. So the protocol needs early development before the device is done. Then we have validation. In this case, because verification and validation are so similar in terms of wording, I just put in here what the typical validation tests are that are seen for medical devices. Human factors engineering is at the top of the list because that's what we're seeing the most. People are surprised by it because it wasn't enforced in the past. Now all the Europeans are requiring and all the FDA reviews are requiring it. Unless you have a very similar device to a previous version that already had usability testing, you're probably going to have to do that. So you're going to have to become an expert in IEC 62366 or hire a firm that is. For simulated use testing, that could be part of the human factors. It could be part of your performance testing. It could be formative testing as well. That's earlier in the phase before design freeze. When you're trying to work out option control analysis for risk controls and try to find the best solution that has the least number of use errors and is the most reliable, that's really helpful. Then we have cadaver labs, very common in orthopedics, but not ideal for all types of things. If you need moving blood, the cadavers don't pump so well. So you might have to use something other than a cadaver if you need flowing blood. So hemodialysis testing might be something different. You might have an animal lab that you're doing. We don't want to use animals if we don't have to. So if the device is safe enough that we can jump right into humans, skip over the animal testing if you can. And there are lots of simulation models out there that we've come up with that are benchtop, so use those to work out the bugs so you can go into human clinicals and avoid the animal. But some things have to be done in animals, like a lot of the coatings that they put on orthopedic devices. You can't see if the bone will integrate into the orthopedic device and the coatings. So that's one of the reasons they do those types of studies. Any kind of bone void filler product, for example. If you're doing a bone, like a blood cohesion study or something like that, probably going to be some animals or at least blood that's used. And then we have finite element analysis. Here's an example where computers have actually become the norm for when we're trying to determine whether that knee implant's going to make it. for durability and the number of use cases, it's not really convenient to have somebody look to use the device over and over and over again up down a flight of stairs to see if it lasts. So they do finite element analysis on the computer to see if it works. Okay, we got a couple of other questions here. I'm going to go a couple more slides, then I think we're going to be at that point where we switch over to purchasing. And some people, that might be a good place to drop off. We're at the hour, but I'm going to keep on going. So any of my team that thought we were going to have a 1 o'clock, I think we're going to be just going on to this to try to finish this, and we'll cancel our 1 o'clock meeting as a team. So design and development transfers, the next clause here, you're required to actually have a procedure for design transfer. So that is something they require: design controls, design changes, and design transfer. This is the design transfer. It's the procedures for how to transfer your design into manufacturing instead of prototyping. And so you have to figure out what will be needed. We're going to need work instructions, inspection instructions. We're going to need part numbers. We're going to need racks for the production area. We're going to need equipment. We're going to need process validation, process risk analysis. A lot of stuff that's needed for that. It is not a small amount of work. It doesn't happen at one time. It's not a single point in time. Oh, we did design transfer this afternoon. Not going to happen. Even if you're late by a half hour, it's still not going to happen. It's going to happen over days, weeks, months. So design transfer is a period of time where you're transferring things to production, and it could take you as long as a year. It could require building a new building, hiring a new supplier. A lot of work to do for that, but you're required to have a procedure for it. And most companies have a design transfer checklist, and it's very long and probably copied from GE Healthcare. Next, we have control of design and development changes. This is really something that a lot of people do wrong. And it's not that they're doing the part that they do isn't the problem. It's the part they're not doing that's the problem. There's a lot of things that you have to do. And I just went through this week with a client of ours. We were looking at what things do they have to cover for design change. It was just a label change, but there were a lot of things to cover. And so if you're making a label change, let's say you're making a packaging change, you have to figure out, well, that package, that outer carton probably has some print on it. How do you know that that print's right? How are you going to verify that? How are you going to approve that? Who's the vendor that's going to do that? Are they approved? Do you have all the specs for the material that the carton's made out of? Are you going to have to repeat your shipping validation? Are you going to have to repeat your sterile package integrity testing? Are you going to have to repeat any of your usability testing because it's an over-the-counter product and they only look at the outside of the box when they're doing a self-selection test? So what is the type of study that you're doing that you did the first time through? You make a change. Do you have to repeat that test? And what were the results? And if you read carefully through the FDA's guidance document and the other notified bodies and their guidance documents, when you make changes, it's not just the change that determines whether it needs to be going through a regulatory review. It's also the results of the validation. So you have to go through the whole validation, see if the results were the same. If they were the same and no surprises, then it might be just documentation only. But if you had surprises or had something that didn't go like it did in the previous, didn't have as good a results, you may have to resubmit as a new regulatory submission. So that's something very important. So whenever you're looking at changes, you have to review them, verify them, validate them as needed, because not everything requires validation. Most things are verified, and you have to approve it. And it's not one person that's doing this. It should be all the same people that reviewed and approved the original specification and drawing that you're changing. And they know all the things that affected before. And if those people aren't there, then you need to bring in a new person with the same function and the same training or similar training. And you got to give them a little bit more time to get up to speed because they didn't design it. They're seeing it for the first time. So if it took their predecessor a month to figure it all out, it might take them 3 weeks. So it's going to take a little while. So be prepared for that. This is really important to do well and be very thorough, and you'll be surprised all the things that are affected that you didn't remember to include first time through. For design and development files, this is really critical to understand. This requirement, DHF, goes away in terms of name only. So there's no more term DHF. That will go away as of February 2nd, 2026. The FDA is eliminating that term. They were asked, are you going to come up with a new term, new definition? No, we're not. What? Yeah, ISO 1345 already has it. It's design and development files, clause 7.3.10. That's good. We're good. That's what we need. So it's the same intent. It's just everything, all the compilation of records that was in the history of your device. And the FDA is very particular about this. From the time you started the project to the time you launched the product, not all the changes afterwards. The changes go in your medical device file, the living document, until you have to do a new regulatory submission. Then you start a new project, a new DHF, if you will. But I have highlighted the words here, records. These are records. It's a historical compilation of all the records of all the activities you did from beginning to end. That's not the same as your design outputs are included in this, but most of the documents are records. They're test protocols that you've approved. They're test reports that you've reviewed and approved. They're verification testing, validation testing. So a lot of records that are in your DHF or design and development files. The medical device file, that's at the very beginning. That's a controlled document. That's why it's in section 4, not in section 7. Is the technical file. That's the word they use in Europe. And technically, it's technical documentation. Canada has a requirement for a technical file. Australia has a requirement for a technical file. US has their own requirement. They just used to call it a DMR. Now they're going to call it a a medical device file, and they're going to refer to 423. And the person that was the chairperson of that committee that created that AMDRF document, he's also the person that created the software for the eStar. So the FDA is very familiar with this concept of having an index of the current requirements, the drawings, the specifications for your product. Those are documents that are reviewed and approved, not records of testing. So that's the difference between the two. And that regulation 82181 goes away February 2nd. You just look at 423 instead. So now, this is a different way of looking at it. So at the beginning of the project, when you create the plan, that's creating the DHF, the beginning of it. At the end, when you launch the product, that's when you close that file, that design file. But all these documents are created as you develop it. And in there are these design outputs right here. Okay? So you can see that those outputs are going to go over to our other side. That's going to be our medical device file. So all the outputs go over there. Now, you have some gray area here where you get some testing. So we're going to have software validations in our software documentation. We're going to have cybersecurity pen testing is in our cybersecurity documentation. We're going to have risk management validation and verification testing in our risk management file, and we're going to have usability testing in our usability engineering file. But those are the sort of a conglomeration of both, but each one of those is a file that's required by a different standard. These documents up here, device description, specifications, drawings, labeling, those are all going to be documents that get revved and updated as your index gets updated for your medical device file. Purchasing. This is where probably a good place for people to stop off if they only had an hour. If I already lost you, sorry, go back and watch what you missed. It will be there, I promise. Now I'm going to answer one of the questions. So somebody was saying, as I'm not well, sent an email just trying to join. So you are very welcome. Look at the links or the links in the description down below in the live video when it posts. and you'll be able to go back and catch stuff that you missed and sign up for the quiz to get your training record for both the stage 1 and the stage 2. But thank you very much for joining. And Matthew asked, I want to know best practices for verifying cybersecurity records like penetration testing. So for the penetration testing, you're not really verifying the cybersecurity records. The pen testing is it's a combination of both verification tests. I guess almost all verification tests, not really validation tests. So they're doing the verification testing at a software testing facility where they're trained to look for weaknesses in the software. So if the company has hardened their software design sufficiently and designed the architecture so it was secure, and has made sure during their coding of the software that they didn't include bits of code that had vulnerabilities that can easily be attacked, then they're not going to have an easy time getting into your software, accessing it, or breaking it. That's what the pen testing is going to do. But every time they find a piece of code that could be a vulnerability, they're going to identify what that code is. And it may be an existing code that's already known out there. That's often when they do vulnerability testing, which could be very automated, or they may be doing more of a true white team, a white hackers team blue, or no, it's team red, I think, that goes in and actually is attacking the software and seeing if they can actually break it, if they can get into it and get information that's on the device about the patient, or get information about the software that runs the system, does the analysis, so they can damage it or change it in some way. And they list, here's the vulnerabilities we found. They say, this is what we did, this is the approach we took, and this is what we found. Every single thing that they find, think of it as an audit finding. Just like you do an internal audit, this is like an internal audit, and you're going to take those results, and each one you're going to have to open up a CAPA for, or let's say it's a JIRA ticket if you use JIRA, and you're going to say, how are we going to contain this problem? How are we going to recover the system if it's broken? How are we going to eliminate and harden the system so they can't access it next time? Or maybe we can actually trim out that code altogether and replace it with something that's better. And last but not least, we're going to probably add that to our coding rules and best practices so we don't do that again and don't leave that vulnerability available. And we might even do that vulnerability testing as our as part of our pre-testing before we even send it out to a pen testing company next time. And Matthew put on a few things. Yes, he was talking about red team is the offensive and blue team is the defensive. Thank you very much, Matthew. And then white hat is legal and ethical, and black is hot. Is the black hat is the hackers. So for those of you that aren't familiar with cybersecurity, Matthew just got his cyber forensics degree, and I'm not nearly as strong. The 70s have called and they want their coding language back. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next area. We want to make sure, I didn't spend time on the purchasing, so I'll cover this first. Purchasing process. When you are looking at purchasing, number one, you have three different clauses, 741, 742, and 743. The first one is the purchasing process. You need a procedure for that. In addition to that, along with it, you're going to need purchasing information so you can buy things, buy the right thing and only the right thing. But you should be making sure before you buy something that the supplier can provide it and they're going to meet your requirements. You want to know that they're qualified. So you're going to have to do a little homework. You're going to have to ask for some records and some proof that they're qualified. Sort of like a resume. If they were going to hire a consultant, it would be a resume. It might be interviewing people that can give you a testimonial or give you a reference. But if you're hiring a manufacturer, you start with, are they ISO 1345 certified? Are they FDA registered? Are they ND-SAP certified? Have they had any warning letters? That would be a start. You might actually hire somebody like me or Matthew to go on site and do an audit of them. So do a supplier audit to make sure that they're qualified. Make sure that they have the procedures that they're supposed to have in place, because not all auditors are created equal. Maybe the auditor that audited them didn't do as good a job as they said. Oh, yeah, that's a purchasing procedure. It's not the best, but it meets the requirements. So here you go. Here's your cert. We want somebody that's really good as a supplier, not somebody that's mediocre, because that'll make your product mediocre. So make sure you are qualifying those suppliers and you're really being tough on them, and define when you're going to reevaluate those suppliers and how you're going to monitor their performance. A lot of companies are just receiving product in and say, yep, it's the right stuff that I ordered, and not actually doing their own inspections. That's a mistake. And yes, it costs money to do inspection, but you should have more rigorous process of making sure that product is good than just saying, yep, I got the right paperwork. When was the last time you saw a CFC, a certificate of conformity, that said the product doesn't meet the requirements? I've never seen one. They all say they're conforming, yet we still have bad product. I wonder how that happens. Okay. When you are, and this dovetails right into this slide, when you are trying to qualify a supplier, there are antique tools that are not in as high quality as this drill that we have on the left. If your supplier quality system looks like that drill, I apologize that it hurts, but you need to improve. If you are only asking for, do they have ISO certification, that's not enough. If you're asking for a copy of their quality manual that they got out of a Cracker Jack box, that's not enough. They downloaded it from the internet, they put their name on it, that's not enough. Supplier questionnaire. There are pages and pages and pages and pages of questions that are all yes or no questions. Nobody ever writes no to anything. Everything's a yes, 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 yes. Nobody asks the question, have you ever made product that was non-conforming? Nobody's ever going to ask that question. They always ask the question like, do you have a procedure for document control? Yes, we do. Those are the kinds of questions that are in those questionnaires. And yes, they were copied from that really big company too. That company had so many people that went to other companies that shared what they learned, and they had some really good practices, but now everybody's using the same questionnaires. Come up with your own that's relevant to your device and make them open-ended questions and put them in a spreadsheet. And yeah, I did a whole entire video about that and a blog about it. And the CFC, oh, they gave us a CFC. We have a CFC. See the CFC? Yeah, I've seen that. Does it have the same date as the last CFC and the previous CFC and the previous? Did they just do a photocopy of the same sheet 400 times and they just insert one in every box? Because I've actually seen that. Some companies do that. Some actually have a new person sign it. But when the photocopy is getting hard to read, you kind of think that maybe it's not so authentic and maybe not so current. The modern tools, now this happens to be one of our customers. They have a very modern drill. It is battery powered. It doesn't show the flip side, but the flip side, you can even see which way the battery's oriented through a little see-through window where they pull out the battery tab. It also has a drill stop on it. You can forward and reverse the direction. It's sterile. It's disposable. There's a lot of things about this that are very, very modern, and it works great. But when you're looking at modern supplier tools for supplier evaluation, you can't be asking, do they have a CFC? You need to be asking, do they have a C of A, at least a certificate of analysis? But ideally, I'd want an A3 proposal report to select and qualify the supplier. I'd like to see process validations of the major manufacturing processes that they're going to do. Don't wait until after you've engaged them to ask for their IQ. Look at their IQ and OQ before, and maybe a draft protocol before you engage them. And maybe you want to know what kind of statistical process control they use and see if there's any evidence of run charts anywhere in the building. And if you're like automotive, you do a PPAP. I actually worked in automotive for a while in fuel systems where every car, the risk is it blows up. So high risk. We had to do 300 piece build with 0 defects for the entire pumping system with the customer watching real time. And we had to run at capacity. So that demonstrated we could run at capacity. Everything was up and running. No ands, ifs, or buts. All the inspection was done perfect and no defects, which meant everybody was trained and all the procedures were there. And they sat there and watched. And it had to be done on schedule. It had a schedule. Parts are going to arrive. You're going to build your 300, and then we're leaving. And we're going to take the parts with us. The finished parts they took with them, and they evaluated the parts in the field, in an actual vehicle. So that's a PPAP. And you have to provide a report for that too. Very long report in a standardized format. So if you are going to qualify your supplier, now you say they're qualified. Now we have to have a written agreement. That's why I have it in orange on this slide instead of yellow or white. You have to have a written agreement. The FDA requires it. The Europeans require it. Your supplier, you need a written agreement. A lot of companies say, well, my supplier won't sign an agreement, so we're going to put it in like the PO. Well, that works to a certain extent, but if they're supplying something that is unique, it is custom for you, that's not enough. If they're providing a number 10 screw to you, not a big deal, because it's a standard item that has a spec that's already recognized by everybody. Like, I know what a number 10 screw is. What is it made out of? Made out of stainless? Is it 304, 316? Something cheaper? Is it galvanized? Is it ceramic? What is it made out of? That's about my only question. So maybe the coating and the base material, that's what I want to know. What size it is. That's about it. So when you're buying off-the-shelf items, not so important that you have a written agreement because they're providing something of low risk and high volume with a recognized commodity standard. But when you have custom things like a molded part to your mold design and you paid for the mold, you need a complete full-blown validation of that. And you want to have an agreement in place that says what they're going to do to maintain the mold, says what they're going to do to revalidate the mold when they have to do a significant repair, talks about what things they're going to measure and what frequencies they're going to do it, how they're going to package it up. If it's a sterile product that you're assembling, like that drill I showed, is it going to be single bagged housing pieces or double bagged housing pieces? Why does that matter? Because I don't want to bring a dirty bag into my clean room to assemble it. I want to bring a clean bag into my room. So if you double bag it, I can clean out the outer bag, peel that away, clean off the inner bag, and bring it through the pass-through, and I won't get my clean room dirty. But that needs to be a requirement that's in writing or they won't do it because it costs more money and takes more time, and they're lazy. So, and maybe they don't know how to operate because they just mold parts real cheap. So you got to tell them what you want, and you need it in writing. And you need to do supplier audits to make sure they're doing what you said. There are also some records that are exempt. I put this here because we just discussed supplier evaluations. Last week we covered quality audits, internal audits, and manager reviews. Those records were exempt under the QSR. They will no longer be exempt as of February 2nd. They're already accessible through MDSAP. They're already accessible through your ISO 1345 audits. So the FDA is like, what's the big deal about making them available to us? We need to modernize the way we do things. So we're going to look at those. Then the verification of purchase products. So I've already touched on this once, but I'm going to make a really big deal about this. When you receive a part, you need to be confident that it is an accurately, correctly made product. If somebody is giving you inspection results, you should tell them what you want the inspection results to be formatted like. Do I want a run chart? Do I want a CPK value? I want to know how many hours it was run, if there were any problems during the run. If they're going to give me all that information, sure. I'm okay with them doing the inspection if they're going to give me all that information. But if they give me a CFC that says, we followed your requirements, no, that's not going to fly for me. I want to see all of the details, not some of the details. And maybe there are only certain things that are important. Like if I saw a run chart and I saw it was rock solid, I might not worry so much. But we should have an agreement on what you're going to provide for documentation to me if I'm going to outsource my inspection to you. Otherwise, I need to do the inspection myself. So don't just accept whatever they're offering. Particularly, what blows my mind is people that can't even tell me what they're going to get, and they've already placed their order. We've got an agreement. It says they'll give us an inspection record. We don't know what those will look like, but they're going to give them to us. So you need to specify, this is what we want. Give them a C of A template. Say, this is what we want you to fill in every single run. We want this data every single run, please. So make sure you've specified what kind of inspection you're going to do. And the calibration ID should be there. The lot of raw materials should be there. The date should be there. The person that did the work should be there. Whoever, you need all that information. Methods of inspection. So I actually have an article about what are the methods of inspection, what are the best methods. So go check that out. That will help you if you're used to just reading a C of C and saying, yep, it's what they said it was the last 400 times. No change. Control of production and service provision. So this is production and service. A lot of companies don't have service. But if they do, you have to have procedures for service. You also need procedures for production. You need to have established and maintain a record for each medical device or each batch. So you have each medical device when you have serialized implants, when you have serialized circuit boards. If it's serialized, you cover each medical device separately. If there's a final test for each unit, that's when you might be applying that number to the part as a designation that it passed the final test. In that serial number gets recorded on the test report and the date and name of that person. If you are required to provide that extensive traceability for implants, then you have to do that. But if you are doing something where the whole entire lot of 1,000 parts is the same, then you need it for the batch. And so you might be doing a statistical sampling of the batch. So that you look on an AQL chart, you might do normal sampling, a 1.0, and you pull this number of samples. It could be a Z1.4 plan. It could be a Z1.9 plan. So depending on that, it's going to tell you how many sample and how large the lot was. You'll know what you have to pull, and then you would sample those parts. But that's how you control production. You have in-process inspection, you have final inspection, you have procedures, you might have automated tests, you might have manual tests, you might have visual inspection, you have training of the people that are doing that, and you might have functional tests that are going on. If you're in printed circuit boards, you have not only qualified inspectors that have passed the test where they had to do a practical part where they demonstrate they can actually look at a board and tell you what's wrong with it, but in addition to that, they have automated systems that are validated to grab the right part and put them in a place. Those are pick and place machines. It's surface mounted technology. In addition to that, they have an automated optical inspection system at the end that can actually detect counterfeit parts. They're that sophisticated and tell you when the soldering isn't quite right or when it's slightly crooked. Then they have continuity tests, ICT testing that you're doing, like a bed of nails coming down and making sure that there are no shorts in the board. And then they have functional tests in these boards. And then they have X-ray. If you have a BGA style IC, that chip has little beads of solder underneath it, and you want to make sure that there's no shorts there where you can't see, and you can only see by X-ray. So these are all the methods they use in addition to visual inspection. And it's all automated. So much, much higher confidence level than it would be it looks good. Here's another C of C. Next thing, cleanliness of product. So if you have a product that is going to be used sterilely, you have very specific requirements. If you have a product that's going to go into the nose or the mouth, it might not have to be sterile, but it should still be clean. And you don't want all kinds of residues and debris on it that are not supposed to be there. So you would have some cleanliness requirements, and you would indicate how the product is supposed to be cleaned. If you have, let's say, a drill bit, you're going to want to remove any of that metalworking fluid. If you have a pair of, let's say it's a pair of scissors to do a suture removal, I'm going to cut the suture. It's not going to go inside the body. It's already healed up and it's a scab there. I'm just going to cut the suture. Why do I need sterile? You don't. But at the same time, I need to make sure they're clean scissors. If I have sterile scissors that are clean, that's even better. But if I don't, I need to at least make sure they're clean. So a lot of metal devices that are assembled and machined, they're going to have special cleaning requirements to remove the residues and contaminants from the assembly and manufacturing process. Then we have installation. You need a procedure for that as well. So I've just shown you an example here of what we mean by installation. Installation is not upload software. What I did on my cell phone when I got it, that's not installation. We call it install. We install the SIM card. Yeah, I use this little thing and I poke it and I stick the card in. That's not installation. Installation is when you need a rigger and you need an electrician and you need procedures and you need a test, and it takes you all day and might be very highly skilled work and somewhat dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Yep, that's installation that we're talking about. So you need records of it, you need procedures of it, you need to do tests to make sure it was done right. Just like they didn't do on my cell phone to make sure they gave me the right SIM card that wasn't broken. I got a beef with the Verizon lately. And then for servicing, yes, you need a procedure for that same thing. You're going to have all kinds of measurement equipment. So you replace a component or upgrade software or recalibrate. You're going to test to verify it was done correctly. You're going to have a procedure for that. You're going to make measurements. You're going to have calibrated gauges, and you're going to have records of it, and the people that do it need to be trained. Then we have sterilization. So sterile medical devices, you need records of each sterilization batch, and you need traceability to the batch. So that's specific requirements right in the regulations. I put in here a little bit from our sterilization training. There are category A methods. If you are not using category A methods, you need to be an expert in sterilization to even pull this off. So don't do the category B stuff unless you absolutely have to. And if you absolutely have to, hire an expert. But the technology has come so far now that we have self-contained biological indicators that give us tests in seconds. So that device on the right-hand side there, that can tell you from a barcode what unit it was. It can give you the traceability you need to the batch. It'll give you an alert on your cell phone that says it passed or failed, and it will give it to you real time. So you don't even have to hang around and wait for the number. It'll just send it right to your phone. So that's, or send you an email, or both. So fantastic technology that we have now. Self-contained BIs eliminate the need for a microbiologist to do the testing. Very easy to use, foolproof, validated, automated, and tracks everything and gives you a report that you can include in your DHR or batch record. So that's really where we're at now. We're not in the Stone Ages where we're filling in forms and asking microbiologists to make sure it was filled in right. You can validate all that and then just follow the procedure and do your monitoring and keep records of it. Validation of processes. So if you have an automated process like sterilization or molding, you're going to want to validate that. Any kind of ultrasonic cleaning, any kind of plating, any kind of coating, you're going to have to validate those processes. You need procedures for it. You need a protocol. So protocol isn't just enough. Protocol is something you're going to execute for a specific run, but the procedure is more high level. It says how you create that protocol and what the requirements are. Maybe even a template of you need to define the scope, the purpose, what tests are going to be done, the method that's going to be used, the standard that's going to be used, the acceptance criteria, the statistical sampling. Here's all the things that need to be in your protocol. That's what the procedure tells you. And it should mirror very closely what the FDA's requirements are and what's in that book that I'm showing there. So if you want to learn more, go check out my video on YouTube on process validation. I was actually one of the contributors to that book. And there is a free guidance document out there that you can download that actually has a template for sealing up sterile packaging. So you can actually copy and paste. Instead of copying it from a really big company that did it right, you can copy it from an international regulator form instead. And you know that's right. And then we have validation of the sterilization process and validation of the sterile barrier system. Yes, of course, you need a procedure for that as well, just like you did process validation in general, but there are specific standards you have to follow, 11607-1 and -2 for package integrity testing. So you need that. And if you look in those standards, there is a requirement for you to have a quality system and procedures for design and packaging. So if your company says we're just a repackager or relabeler, yeah, you need design controls too. You just need it limited to packaging and labeling, but you're still doing design, so you can't exclude it. You're just limiting the scope of it to packaging requirements because you got to comply with 11607. For the sterilization validation, I didn't list standards here because there are tons of them. All those different category A, each one has multiple standards that apply. So if your biological indicator, your bioburden enumeration, you have EO residuals, you have overkill method 1, all these different things that you have to remember. And they send people off for training on just one mode. So just gamma, just E-beam, just EO. So depending on what method of sterilization you're going to be doing or methods, you might have a lot of training that's required. But that's what's required for sterilization validation. And yes, you need a procedure for the sterilization validation. And you need a procedure for packaging validation. And there are those two standards listed for that. But you should have, for packaging, there should be the design of the sterile barrier, the packaging system, the package integrity testing, the transit testing, and being testing on aged packaging. For identification, so we have not only lot numbers and serial numbers, but we also have the status of things. You have to identify the status throughout the product realization process, especially with regard to monitoring and measuring or inspection. So make sure that you're doing that. The example that I always like to use is we're inspecting these implants and we open them all up and then we get them mixed up with paperwork because we have them all open at the same time. You need it very clear. These implants have yet to be inspected. This implant right here is being inspected. Those implants passed inspection, and the ones on the floor in the red bin failed inspection. So clearly designated by color, by physical location in my environment, and I've probably got it labeled somewhere on my desk. If I'm a QC inspector, we like to say the person is retentive. The person doesn't do anything without labels and doesn't do anything differently ever. Everything has to be just so. That's the kind of person you want doing inspection. And everything is physically located and goes either left to right or right to left, depending on your work environment. And it only goes that way. That's what you want. And you have to have everything identified and you have to have it signed and dated, serial numbers, lot numbers. That's what identification is all about. And it all should trace back to your raw materials. Then we have traceability. So traceability has a sub clause for traceability specific to implants. So if you are doing an implant, here's a 3D printed implant on the right-hand side that has a barcode that they've laser etched on there, or whatever the marking was. It's probably laser though. So in that particular case, that's how they're tracking that. So you can just scan the part while you inspect it, and you could, in theory, have multiple ones on the table and still identify which one's which and match it up with the paperwork. Do you want to? No. Why do they have that? Because people didn't do it the way I told them to. After several recalls, they implemented barcoding, and several thousand at that. And then we have it for lower risk device, like a pair of scissors. That might be for keeping track of how many times was this reprocessed or been repaired. And then we have the same thing on printed circuit boards. We identify barcodes and serial numbers and human readable characters. And then to help everybody out, if you use those matrix tags, the data matrix barcodes for UDI from GS1, that's what they'll look like, and they have those numbers that tell you what the different things are. So if you can't remember like me, I like to have these little cheat sheets that help me. For customer property, a lot of people say, oh, we don't have any customer property. But when I dig in and I ask around, I usually find some customer property. So any clinical data, you got some customer property. Now, if you're like some software companies, you deliver the software to the customer, the hospital, and the hospital retains all the imaging data. So the hospital has the customer data, not you. But if you keep everything in the cloud and do all the calculations and algorithms in your cloud, and they have a web-based portal instead of hosting it themselves, now you have the customer data. So you do have customer property, and you have to notify them, report when there's a breach. So that's a case where we've applied a standard that was written for 1910 technology, and we're saying it also applies to the future with cybersecurity. But we really need a standard that does a better job of that. You need to identify what the product is, verify that you've got it there, how many you have, what condition it's in. You need to protect it and safeguard it, store it in the right place, close those boxes up, wrap them up well, label them properly, and don't let anybody in there that doesn't belong. It also goes for drawings. So if you're a contract manufacturer, your customer sent you drawings, all those external drawings that they gave you that you need to make the part, those are all their property, not yours. The mold that they paid for, their property, not yours. So all these contract manufacturers that are molders say they don't have any customer property. They're lying because they didn't pay for all those molds. And then we have preservation of product. If your warehouse looks like this, you probably live near a very big river and it's flooding season. So sometimes this is what our warehouse looks like, and everything in it gets tossed. Sometimes we have fork truck drivers that like to play games around the holidays, and this is what our box looks like on the left. You need a procedure for preservation of the integrity and safety of those products. And that does not include throwing them in a swamp in your warehouse or running them over with a fork truck. So you need a procedure for that too, because somebody will think that's a really good idea to recover that product in that warehouse. No, not if it's a medical device. And then you have to have what in your procedure? Well, you need to tell them how to package the product, how to ship the product, how to keep distribution records of the product. So you're going to need that. If you have software, you need to have procedures to make sure your software gets delivered malware free. So good security practices internally to make sure your product doesn't accidentally get out there with malware because somebody was surfing Facebook. And then you might have product that is physical, and you might not be able to tip it so far, or it will break, or it will become disassembled. So they have these things called tip tells. And this is just a special brand. I saw it on Uline. There are many different versions out there, but they'll have some sort of powder or sand, or in this case, a ball bearing that will move when you tip it a certain distance. And they use those on the side of the box to tell if the product has been properly handled. So that would be an example of protective measures that we can put in place as a design control when we have product that can't be tipped. Another example, you don't want things double stacked. They have little cones you put on top of the pallet so somebody can't stack another one on top of it without crushing that cone. So those are examples of things that we do to make sure that people ship things and package them correctly. Now we're getting into the measurement, the calibration stuff. And for people that were wondering, there's, I think, 72 slides. So we will be done by 2 o'clock. Control, monitoring, and measuring. Why is this person wearing gloves? Yes, they need a procedure, but their procedure says wear gloves. Why? Well, there are oils in your hands. My particular hands are very dry and not a lot of oil on them, but most people have more oil on their hands and oil on their skin, and it can corrode metals. So, and it also leaves fingerprints behind. So it doesn't look nice, but more importantly, it actually can corrode the metal and it no longer is working correctly and it doesn't have the same thickness that it had before. So the dimensions change as they corrode. Doesn't sound like a big deal when you're measuring centimeters, but when you're measuring tenths of a millimeter or hundredths of a millimeter, it makes a difference. In this case, what I'm circling here, so this right here, this little gauge, those are 4 decimal places after the decimal place, and it's millimeters. So it's a 12 millimeter round gauge pin that's being measured, and it's 11.9 something. So the tolerance is plus or minus probably 0.02 millimeters or 0.03 millimeters, maybe even 0.05 millimeters is the tolerance on the drawing for that pin. But if you're doing crude measurements, that would be fine. But if you have very precise measurements of 2 things like a catheter fitting inside another device, that has a very tight requirement in terms of tolerances. So you might need a 3rd digit or maybe even a 4th. Very, very rare. Probably this is a bench mic being used to verify the accuracy of the calibrated gauge, the gauge pin. And then we have the calibration ID sticker at the bottom on the base telling you what the date is that it was calibrated, the date that it's due for recalibration, the calibration ID number, and the person that did the work. And they're wearing gloves so they don't contaminate things, so they don't damage the equipment, so they don't damage the gauges. So that's why they're doing, and they're probably doing it in a temperature-controlled room with humidity control to keep everything pristine. Does everything need that level of accuracy? No. But when you have parts that are metal, they can, there's a coefficient of expansion, so they get hot, they grow. When they get cold, they shrink. And you might not remember that from 6th grade, but the science teacher, he had a ring and he put a ball through it, and then he heated it up and it wouldn't go through the ball, or the ball wouldn't go through the ring anymore because it grew. That's what we're talking about here. Temperature matters to the size of something. So when you have tight tolerances that you're trying to measure, the temperature and humidity matter. So you need to make sure you look at that. For calibration, not only do you need a calibration procedure that says how you're going to manage your calibrated gauges, but you also have to have procedures that say how to do the calibration. So people that outsource that, the lab that you outsource it to will have a procedure, and you need a copy of that so you're aware of it. If you're doing it yourself, like this person was here, they are doing it according to a procedure, and that procedure is referenced in their report. So you will need this 10,012 2003 standard if you are doing that kind of calibration or recalibration yourself. And right up front, 6.2.1 in there, it's all about procedures. Next, we have validation of calibration software. So this actually applies to quality management systems. It applies to production equipment, like automated molding equipment would have software. And then we have monitoring and measuring devices. That would be things like calibrated tools. So all 3 of those have software validation requirements. If you have an EQMS, if you have any kind of software that's used in the quality system, like something that's used for barcoding or keeping track of your barcodes, or maybe that little electronic device to keep track of your biological indicator, anything like that that you're relying on, you're going to have that validated for software. Same thing for your automated production equipment, same thing for your gauge track software, if that's the brand that you use. And there is a standard for this. So before I talked about IEC TR 80002-1, this is ISO TR 80002-2 instead of -1. And it gives you examples in the back. It's a 92-page procedure. If you're familiar with GAMP 5 for the pharmaceutical industry, that's 4 times as long and is not a risk-based process. This is a streamlined risk-based process. We streamlined it down to 92 pages. So it's not easy unless you're validating a spreadsheet, but that's an example in there. Some people have to validate spreadsheets. So if you're using spreadsheets to figure out what your loading configuration should be, or how to pack, how much you can pack in a box or something like that, you might need that. But you might have it automatically assigning lot numbers. You might have it running reports for you when training is required. So EQMS software, production equipment, and calibration maintenance software all needs to be validated. And of course, you need a procedure for it. Okay, another poll. How do you measure the effectiveness of your audit program? So a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know. That's the process approach. We have 7 questions we ask, and the last one we ask is, what metrics do you have? So how do you measure effectiveness of your audit program? Hopefully your auditors are not getting paid by the nonconformity, or you've got a lot more than you really need. But the severity of the findings, the frequency of the findings, or your ideas. So let us know. Links in the YouTube channel. Complaint handling. Okay. So everybody's required to have a complaint handling procedure. It says in here, A through F, it's very prescriptive what the minimum requirements are for your procedure. You have to have a procedure. You have to have those minimum requirements. Typically, the way it works is when you become aware of something that may or may not be a complaint, you start the form, and there's a place on that form to determine, does this meet the definition of a complaint or not? And you have to record that. That procedure tells you how to make the decision. People need special training on that item. And then once they've determined it's a complaint, then they have to do additional documentation, and they have to decide if corrective actions are required, and they have to decide if it's a reportable event. That requires a different procedure that we're going to get to in a second. So you have a procedure that determines whether this meets the definition of something that's reportable. You document that. You determine whether a CAPA is required. You don't always have to have a CAPA. You don't always have to do an investigation, but you do have to document why you did not do an investigation. You have to document why you're not implementing corrective actions, why you're not reporting something. So that's what's covered in that procedure, and that's why training is necessary. It's not trivial. People make mistakes on this. And one of the questions, or one of the things that I advise people on, is make sure your procedure is so detailed that you have examples in the appendices, so they have real life examples that will help them. For regulatory reporting, I would have to cover all the things that are in 21 CFR 803, not the little tiny blip that's in 1345. I'm not going to do that. You need a very detailed procedure for regulatory reporting. You do not want to just rely on the guidance document, because they want you to have a procedure, just like recalls, that you can implement at a moment's notice and not have to look up a guidance document and understand it and train on it while you're supposed to be reporting. You should have that already done, have a very detailed procedure, and a couple of people, redundancy there, a couple of people at least that are trained on how to do that reporting, maybe you and your boss. And you would document in your decision tree what type of reporting is required and what kind of timeline is required, or if no reporting is required, why no reporting is required. And I have actually seen people have a decision tree on a piece of paper and fill it in with a highlighter. That's okay, but other people have electronic quality systems where it asks you questions and you answer them, and you put your rationale for your answer, and it documents it that way. And then we have people that fill in forms, whether they're digital or paper. It doesn't matter. You just have to document that decision according to the questions that are in the guidance. You also need a work instruction or a procedure that tells you how to create electronic submissions gateways for the next gen ESG for the FDA, or if you're going to Europe, how to do the UTIMED reporting. So those would be required in special forms and special procedures and special training. Now, getting back to auditing. So we had asked that question about, so it was a poll question here. How do you measure the effectiveness of your audit program? We covered 822, 823. I put this here because the next clause would be 824. We covered that last week, but we're teaching a course on lead auditing and it'll be available in December. So if you're interested, check it out. And the 1345 standard lists that guidance document. That is the guidance that tells you how to audit quality management systems in general. Then we have monitoring and measuring of products. So we have monitoring and measuring of processes that we covered last week. I put product in here because that would be the inspection activities that go hand in hand with the batch records and the monitoring or controls of production and service. So this seemed like a logical place to put this. It is covered in management reviews to a certain extent as well, but really this is a very important one because you have to document specific things. So not only do you need a procedure on how to inspect product and release the product, but you need to identify what your acceptance criteria is. You need evidence that it passed the acceptance criteria in the records. You have to have the identity of the person who did the release. So not necessarily a signature, unless if you're reading at the bottom here, if you're doing an implant, those typically you're going to have a signature. But if you're not doing an implant, then you're going to be able to just identify the person, not have them sign and date. And then you have the test equipment that's used, so you need a calibration ID. And there's a difference between the person performing the testing and the person releasing product. Whenever you're releasing implants, that's a higher risk item, and they have more requirements. Now we have controlled non-conforming product. I already described this scenario to you. You're inspecting. This is to be inspected. This over here is finished inspection, and it passed. Stuff on the floor is rejects, won't get mixed because it's in a red bin and it's on the floor. What's right in front of me, that's where I'm doing the inspection. This is how you identify and segregate. Maybe you even color code and put signs and barcodes everywhere. But that's how you do it. And I have actually seen people like put the barcode there that you can scan. I'm moving it from here to here and do the transaction just to move a foot. Because it tells people real time in their MRP system what the status of that part is. Before delivery, if you identify something that's non-conforming, so before delivery to the customer, it's still under your control, it's still in your warehouse, it's still on your production floor, you can scrap it, you can return it to the supplier, return it to vendor, you can rework it, or you can use it as is. There are other statuses. Sorting is not a disposition. Sorting is an activity you're going to do to split it up into two or more dispositions. But if you think it's scrap, put it in the red one, and then somebody will confirm it later. Maybe they'll sort through the whole lot, and some of it will be scrap, and some of it will be used as is. Some of it might be perfectly fine and conforming. So sorting is a process, not a disposition. If you've already shipped it to the customer, if you've already shipped it to the distributor, now it's out of your control, and now you have to handle it differently. This is where the recall requirements are. 21 CFR 806, or also Part 7 is also involved there, because you would have enforcement where the FDA decides whether it's a Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3 recall. You obviously need a procedure for your advisory notices or recalls. You use advisory notices when there's no potential for harm. You use recalls when there's potential for harm, especially serious harm that you're going to notify, hey, urgent recall, correction, removal. If you're clarifying something in the instruction for use and there's no reason for harm, or you have a new adapter or something, there's a new model, so the old model is not out there anymore. Maybe it only affects software or firmware, and they won't even see it, but you're making aware of it. That's an advisory notice. But when there's a potential for harm, there was something that was labeled incorrectly, and it could cause a delay in surgery, those are things that you would typically have a recall for. And then the FDA would decide whether it's a Class 1 recall, a Class 2, or a Class 3 recall, and they would prioritize your actions accordingly. But you need a form that's ready to go for both of those. And so when you buy our procedure, there you have it. And I believe I have a copy of each. Yep. So this is what they look like. So advisory notice on the left, recall notice on the right, and the one on the right, that was provided by the FDA. So you can't blame me for whatever's in there. But the one on the left, you can see that I mirrored what the FDA was doing. And it's very easy to distinguish between these two. One says urgent recall. The other one says is green text, not red text. And it says advisory notices. And we say at the bottom, there are no reports of injuries of any type, and the use of device is not expected to present a hazardous situation that may result in harm. So that's very clearly different from the other side that says this is how many deaths and injuries we've seen. You have to have a procedure for the rework as well. So this would be typically relabeling is the most common rework that we see out there. But whatever rework you're going to do, you identify this non-conforming, you segregate it, you disposition it for rework. Before you start the rework, you have to have a procedure. The procedure has to be reviewed and approved by the people that normally approve the normal process. And there may be some additional inspection activities that have to be done to verify that the rework was done correctly and the part is good. Especially in things like printed circuit boards. You manually pull off ICs or chips, send it back through the AI or the AOI software so it will verify that there's no parts that are missing or in the wrong place. You may have to run off shift to keep it running, but that's how you have to do that. Go back to the original inspection methods, maybe even additional inspection methods because you reworked it. That takes us to the end of the line here. So once again, my apologies. It's a training record, so you will get a record of the training that you can include. I've gone through my refresher training, and I took the quiz, and here was the date I took it, and here was the grade I got. So I hope that helps you. If you have any other questions, please contact us at Medical Device Academy, and there's a Contact Us page. The link is right there. Okay? Thank you very much, and have a great day. Bye-bye.